Hi, Mary. Happy New Year.
Hi, Deb. Happy New Year to you.
Your health's been okay. You've avoided
Huh?
the current wave.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, Debbie, I just checked and the resolution was sent to DOT.
Oh, okay. If you can, when you get a chance, no rush, just send me a copy. And I do prefer to see it before it goes out.
Hi, Jay. Happy New Year.
There we go.
Hi, Jim.
Hello, I'm not sure I unmuted before, but whoever said hello, thanks.
That was me, Mary.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Jim.
Hello. Happy New Year.
Thank you. You too. Oh, we get to see Mary's Christmas tree.
Yeah. I usually leave it up until Three Kings Day. And more importantly, this year, my committee meeting is on Three Kings Day. So, you
Right.
know,
You want the full backdrop? Yeah, sometimes I feel like, oh, I'm like ready to like have it out, but I feel like I don't know, maybe we got it later or something. I feel like, well, it has barely been here already. And we definitely have the same thing. It doesn't go out before three. It would never go before Three Kings. Only going to wait a few minutes because I actually feel, we're obviously down again a person without Omar, and Leo is sick, got sick today.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah. So he was maybe going to get on, but from the sounds of his splitting headache, I don't think so.
I don't like doing things with a splitting headache. It doesn't make me more charming at all.
Doesn't make me think too straight either.
Well, I'm not a big fan of pain, actually, you know.
Yeah.
Um, I'm just gonna give it another minute and then we'll get started.
How many people do we have in our committee now? There's Bruce. He said he'd show up from wherever he was.
Happy New Year, all.
Happy New Year.
Hey,
Hi,
Bruce.
thank you for making it.
Oh, sure. I made it. We made it.
And there's Wayne.
What's that?
Hello, Happy New Year.
Happy
Happy
New Year.
New
Would
Year.
you like
Hi,
to be
Wayne.
visible?
All right, so we're missing Robin, we're missing Leo. One, two. Oh, so that means we sort of have a quorum, right?
I don't know. What are the numbers?
Because there's 5 of us, but we only have, we're down to 8 committee members. Wait, I'm missing
Yeah.
somebody.
Your
But-
5 sounds good. Yeah.
Okay, so since we don't have like a resolution topic tonight, actually, let's do this right. I'd like to call this meeting to order at 7:04. This is Traffic and Transportation, CB 12. My name is Debbie Nababian. I'm the chair of the committee. Thank you for being here tonight. Tonight's a bit unusual because we really just had an item that I wanted to discuss that's sort of very central to the work of the committee, but it's not a resolution item, but I do want to sort of have this framework because it really informs everything we do on the street side, that we now have this document. I have one other item which we probably won't cover tonight because it was something that Leo had raised. And then we do have, so I'm not going to ask somebody to take notes. I'm just going to, let me just jot down who's here and I'll just, since it is just a discussion, I'll take very broad notes. All right, so just before we get into the agenda item, I don't have any sort of solid updates. I mean, as we came out of December, obviously happy to see the elevators open. Actually, let me just introduce who's here from the committee and from CB 12. So we have Mary Anderson, Jay Mazer, Bruce Robertson, Jim Berlin tonight. And then also I see we have Wayne Benjamin from CB 12 and a number of members of the community. So after we sort of have the initial discussion, we'll have an opportunity to hear from people who might have other things that they're here for tonight. And, oh, so I was starting to say, I don't have any big updates except to say, obviously there's a lot going on with service limitations at MTA right now. Maybe I don't think we've heard from the community very much about it, but obviously the MTA is really impaired at the moment in terms of its ability to provide the usual levels of service. So, you know, we'll see where that goes. I think I'd like to have them maybe come soon. They haven't been here for a general update in a while, just kind of understand what's up next. Bruce?
Yeah, I'd just like to point out that the new commissioner of transportation is Adonis Rodriguez. So he has
Oh.
Right.
a pretty fair understanding of where we are, I would suppose.
That is an excellent point. Excellent point. But actually, with that, I think that's actually where I want to segue because it's very salient. So in 2019, the city council passed local law, I think it's 195. And this sort of created a requirement of the DOT to have a streets plan that would be published and updated and published every 5 years. And so the first one that flows out of that 2019 legislation was published recently. And it is almost 100 pages long, as you as committee members know. And there's a lot in there. And so have been eager to kind of have us go through that to some extent. And I just want to sort of a little bit, I'm summarizing from the introduction from the prior transportation chair, I'm sorry, DOT commissioner. But I think they sort of view this document that was published as they call it, a draft blueprint for the future of the streets, a sort of starting point for public outreach. And I like the term they use, the beginning of a structured conversation. So if you say we want streets that are safer, that we reprioritize pedestrians and cyclists, maybe more than they've been prioritized in the past relative to automobiles. We want to have a plan that sort of recognizes the urgency of the climate crisis. All these things, we sort of need a basis to have those conversations, understanding that the city is made up of neighborhoods that are quite different and distinct. So our streets policy might be one overall policy, but it still needs to also be like the sort of blueprint for how we think about what is different about our many neighborhoods, which have very different considerations. So the plan, I think, tries to reflect sort of all the things that are the current environment writ large, climate change, a city, streets that have gotten very congested, all those things, but then also all the things that the pandemic brought us, like you have the open streets, you have open restaurants, you have the problems of delivery and freight, which really blew up during the pandemic because so many people shifted towards deliveries. And you sort of, how does that all come together? It also, I guess there's a portion that talks about, there's a lot of things that have come before this. So it doesn't ignore the fact that you had, I guess, what was called One New York City in 2015, that was really about limiting greenhouse gas emissions by prioritizing transit, walking, cycling, reducing congestion, increasing bus performance, all those things that have a direct nexus to climate issues and greenhouse gas levels. Then there was, which I think we're all pretty familiar with because it's much of what we've been operating within for the past number of years, which is Vision Zero. So that action plan was 2014, and I guess there were updates or sort of borough-specific work done in 2015 and 2019. There was Green Wave 2019, which was the citywide vision for improving cycling safety. There was a Better Buses Action Plan, which was one of my favorite documents. I love reading the Better Bus Action Plan of 2019. And then there was Delivering New York Freight Plan, which was just last year, 2021. So again, this doesn't exist in a vacuum. There is all the things and some things that happen at the regional planning level that this builds on. And I guess DOT has had its own strategic plans, et cetera. So I just would want to summarize what the stated goals of this document are, and then eventually get us to the part that, like, if we can each, I mean, I know not everybody was able to get to it, but to the extent you got to look through the sort of specific subsection and can just say a few words about it, we'll get there hopefully shortly, as long as I don't go on too long. There's sort of this idea when you do a strategic plan, if it's a good one, is that what's your basis? Like, what are the challenges you're dealing with? So we have things like the city is growing population wise, and it has for a number of years. As a city, we probably have we do have pretty good sustainable mode share, meaning people use public transit, they walk, etc. And that's particularly true in Manhattan for most neighborhoods. But then the probably biggest challenge of a plan like this is city street space is finite. And so how do you design and operate streets and make the myriad trade-offs that one needs to make? And again, as we know as committee members, and as we know as people walking the planet, people can talk and demand and ask for things and say, but they rarely want to talk about what they're willing to trade, or sort of have the conversation of, unfortunately, there's not unlimited funding for things. So you have to make trade-offs, and that's not easy work. So the challenge is to strike the balance between all the different functions we use, functions that we look to in our streets, the different modes of transportation, and do all this with the fact that it just really depends on the neighborhood. So 10 goals of the plan. Safety. Again, we've spent a lot of what we see in this committee relates to safety, starts with safety concerns. I think we know that terrain pretty well. Equity. I'll talk a little bit more about sort of what they mean by that within the plan. 3, mode shift and transportation options. So this goes to increasing sustainable travel modes, and making more, reconfiguring streets so that you're making more attractive choices available for New Yorkers, and but also support the continued growth of New York City while reducing congestion, while reducing emissions, all that stuff. There's goals, sorry, this page I just need to pull up. Actually, I'll come back to, I'll just talk about the ones that I have the sort of extra notes on. There's a goal with respect to curb management, which is ensuring that it's allocated in a rational manner for the diversity of uses, etc. But just to spend a little more time on the concept of equity, because it does affect CB12 kind of directly. But what they've done here is they say, we want to prioritize investment in areas, like we want to identify priority areas, but what's our criteria to call something a priority area for investment? So what they do is, one, they look at percentage of population that's non-white, percentage of population that's low, that is low income households. 2, they look at density concepts like density of population per square mile, density of jobs per square mile, just kind of get to this idea of how intensely are the streets used. And 3, what's come before, previous investment levels. So that way you're sort of reflecting people, neighborhoods that maybe had less investment, but higher need, over time. So there are also goals, and I'm sorry, I'm just not putting my hand on the page, probably because I pulled it out earlier, that go to outreach, that go to sustainability, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we'll sort of back into that through sort of breaking down into the subsections that we sort of are assigned. So with that, why don't Mary, I think you had a chance to sort of do your parts, and you actually had 2. So you want to, okay, here, and I have the goals now, but do you want to go ahead now?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't have a lot of time to go over this because I've been busy with doctors and therapy and all kinds of things. Now that everything's off my hand, I had to start therapy. So
I bet.
now we're, expected to do things. But anyway, I mean, there's a section on walking and pedestrians. And one of the things they point out is that almost all of our trips by subway or by bus, even by car, begin or end as a pedestrian. So that's a big area that needs to be looked at, and that they're trying to look at. And of course, I look at it from the aging perspective and the disabled perspective. So one of the things that they're working on is city benches, and they have benches in a number of areas where it kind of provides a place for people to sit when they're en route from one place to another, and they get tired, need to rest their legs or their feet for a moment. And I know that I've worked with DOT to provide benches in certain areas where we felt that kind of thing was lacking. And sidewalk program to prevent injuries, such as defective sidewalks or missing or broken defective sidewalks, missing or broken parts of sidewalks, and also at the corners. And what they've been trying to do is update the ped ramps at these corners. And sometimes they're problematic because there are broken areas of some of those ped ramps as well. So that provides a challenge for the disabled and the seniors, because your footing is not as good as it once used to be, even if you're not using a device to walk with. And they also talked about the pedestrian plan, addressing pedestrian needs beyond basic safety and accessibility, such as comfort and convenience. So, the benches provide, an answer, one answer to some of that.
Right.
And just one more thing I wanted to point out on this is the pedestrian crossings. There are places where it's difficult for pedestrians to cross the street safely due to a lack of crosswalks. And that's one of my pet peeves, is because on Haven Avenue, there is no safe way to cross, because most of Haven Avenue is without crosswalks or lights or signs, stop signs, or any of that kind of thing.
And so, Mary, you're saying that they
Let
actually
me
touched
just
upon that?
Get this call for a moment.
Yep. Jim, do you want to start your section? I just had one quick question that I can do with Mary on the other side also. Or let's,
Okay. My presentation is going to be very different. I was asked to look up and discuss the idea of freight.
Sorry.
And you might go, freight, what does that have to do with our residential neighborhood? Well, to begin with, the busiest bridge in the world enters our neighborhood. So that's part of it. And, you know, recently, because of the pandemic, there's been so much more commerce via, delivery of all sorts. So what I'd like to do, which is, you'll see is different from Mary's approach, is talk about, because Debbie asked that I look at the two different documents she talked about, the general street plan, which has to talk about all the streets all over the city. And then they did this other plan a year ago, essentially all about freight. So you may have to indulge me. I just figured out how to do sharing my screen. And I just want to show you how different the documents are, and then we can discuss the main one. But and the point of this is that the general document about plans for the streets, and it's good that we have one, that just has an outline, and each line in the outline ends up being a page and a half in the actual document about freight. And then each of the lines in that document, basically, as Debbie pointed out so wisely, is this general statement that has to be implemented neighborhood by neighborhood, because what's good for Brooklyn Heights may not be good for Washington Heights. So let me see if I can do this. I'm gonna go to share content. It says only hosts can share in this meeting.
Chanel, can you make Jim the host for a moment? Co-host, I should say.
Co-host. Don't want to have too much power,
Exactly. There you go.
There we go. So I'm going to share my screen and you'll see my iPad. And this will happen. Let's see. The microphone is on. I'll push that. Oh, there we go. Yes, now you presumably see my screen. Now, let me go to pictures. Okay. This page is a page from the document we'll be discussing about freight. And notice sort of halfway down the middle of the page, there's this entry, truck safety. And that's all they have to say in the document, all about streets. And the reason, by the way, I'm saying all this is I commend these documents to you very highly. A great deal of thought was put into them, and the ramifications of what they're talking about will come, to Washington Heights when they try to fix things. So at some point, we might want to, each of us, look at this. Now, look at the detail in the other report. This is the thing on safety. And notice it goes on and on and on, and more pages of it. But so if you're interested in truck safety, then you would actually look at this other document, the one from last year. So much for that. Now let me go
So Jim, you're saying that
to books.
the
This is
the page or two on freight within the streets plan is really just a very high level synopsis of what was in the 2021.
Exactly. That is
Okay,
my point.
yeah.
And so if you want to learn about the details, but just let's look at what they're talking about. They obviously, and again, each of these one lines are just this whole, panoply of things that could be done, ought to be done. Truck safety, my goodness gracious, people are hit by trucks all the time. Part of it is because the truck drivers can't even see them. And loading zones we already know about, and we know that it's got to be been done better. And then they, you know, have all these other ideas, you know, off-hour deliveries insofar as they can be done, that will, you know, reduce congestion. And the other thing is that they basically want to have other ways of freight getting here, not just the trucks across the George Washington Bridge. So that's what this, the stuff, and then even a commercial cargo bike program, which in a sense sort of exists with all these delivery people, but they would formalize it. And, you know, insofar as people are pedaling bicycles or pedaling electric bicycles, this is much greener than having these big trucks go all over the place. So again, you know, all these things, and this is the second page, and I think that's basically it. And then again, they have these really nice maps too. Look at that. So, but again, you know, electric trucks, you know, all these things, and you can read all the headlines yourself. So again, my point is just to show you what's there, and each of these paragraphs, as Debbie pointed out, is expanded in spades in the original document about freight from last year. And again, insofar as you have all this time to do this reading, I would suggest that you know, this is very, very worthwhile because it is very thoughtful. And now let me unshare my screen if I can figure out how to do that.
And
Let's go here. Screen. I'm stop broadcasting my screen. Now I'll go back to Zoom. Does anyone have any questions or comments?
well, Jim, I would just highlight for people that not all the sort of subtopics have this, but within the freight, they're mentioning sort of what the goals are of the freight. And I guess there's like one part of it relates to trying to increase the rationality at the curb, but another has to do with all the emissions, make things more efficient, decrease all the negative effects of the traffic. Yeah, so curb specific plus, you know, I guess what I would call the safety and the sustainability stuff. I mean, some of it looks very sort of futuristic in the scheme of what we're used to in New York with the trucks. I guess there's a lot of stuff that technology now can do with enforcement and stuff like that, which comes up in other areas as well. And it's certainly been a challenge here, right? Like how often do we get asked for put more speed cameras in and stuff like that? But we really are, there's a lot of technology out there that can be used in a enforcement kind of way. And it's nice to see them talking about it, right? All right.
I'm going to disappear and then I'll sign back in. I'm going to a different machine. See you soon.
All right. Mary, I just had one follow-up on what you were saying. So were you saying about the crosswalks that they do contemplate that in the, like they are addressing what you were saying about there's plenty of streets that need them that don't have them?
Exactly, because, you know, an example, like I said, is Haven Avenue, because if you enter Haven Avenue on 177, on 177th Street, which is the upper end of Haven Avenue, there's no crosswalk until you get down past the new building. It's like 171, 170, 171, I guess it is. And cars fly through there. And it's just unsafe to cross anywhere in between. And, you know, I do it all the time because I have to get over on the other side of Haven frequently. But I put my life in my hands, me and my walker, and hope that, you know, I
Yeah.
make it to the other side alive.
No, absolutely. Absolutely.
Because you can't see the cars coming and the cars can't see you because you're trying not to get out too far into the street. It's, you know.
Yeah, no, I know. I used to have to do that
And,
regularly.
you know, I mean, the thing is that they you know, and they point out in all of this that, you know, I'm talking about my area because I know it best, but they are trying to come up with a plan that will kind of work for the entire city. even though, with modifications, obviously, for, various and sundry things that you pointed out, in terms of the population and the needs of each particular community. But,
Well, yeah, actually, and I just realized, and I didn't finish that thought when I was saying it, is that our CB12 is part of what is considered a tier 1 priority district.
right,
So we should be seeing, a reflection of prioritization amongst other communities, but that we're considered in that top tier for projects. And it doesn't mean that we'll have projects in all these various areas that we're talking about either. So, not to put you on the spot, Jay, but did you have a chance to look through your section or no?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And which was your section again?
It was biking.
Oh, really? All right. So what's the deal with biking?
Well, first of all, it explains that the number of bike trips has tripled to 530,000 in the last 15 years. And the city is concerned with increasing safety by improving street design as a way of further increasing bike usage. Vision Zero includes protected bike lanes. And by 2050, 1 in 10 trips people make will be by bike in the city. Bike share is also promoted in this as being a public-private partnership. One that I'd add personally doesn't work for this neighborhood because there aren't any bikes left in this neighborhood for people to rent. And unless you think that the removal of certain parking spaces is a good thing, it doesn't have too much benefit for the residents of Community District 12 yet. Although actually, I personally think removing parking spaces is a good thing because parking spaces attract cars, and having fewer cars on the road would be a good thing. Bike share has 99,000 trips on average on a daily basis. And in general, the bike goals are to increase safety, increase sustainability, allow people to get around, and increase participation of NYCHA housing and have disabled and SNAP recipients in the bike share program. That's in general all that it says.
Right.
I actually had a little point I wanted to make about Mary's presentation, which is, just since I remember it, New York was really a pioneer in the idea of pedestrian safety. Mayor Lindsay's first traffic commissioner, Henry A. Barnes, was the first person to develop the idea that the idea is to move people, not traffic. And he pioneered the double red light, which has now been replaced by the double green light, to allow people to cross the street more easily. And it might sound ridiculous now, but this was a huge advance in thinking compared to the first half of the 20th century about about traffic control, about transportation. I think we should all keep that in mind.
Yeah. Oh, I want to come back and make a comment on that, but Bruce, you've had your hand up.
Yeah, other than I agree with Jay's ideological bent towards pedestrians and bikes versus cars. Are we seeing more and more city bikes going on sidewalks rather than in the street taking up parking spots? I think that's the way the DOT, or at least Kimberly Rancourt from the DOT has been saying that they're trying to not take away parking spots. But I know in our neighborhood, we have city bikes on sidewalks. I'm sorry. Yeah, on the sidewalks, not in the street, over by the Hispanic Society and up at 162 and other places, up by Columbia Presbyterian. So that's sort of a good compromise in my estimation. That's my point.
Well, I think there's probably two answers there, and it segues very well into my section. So so I'm going to sort of push in on mine, which is that one, we to date, and certainly in CB12, because we are very sensitive to the parking spot issue. It's very tough parking here. We're competing with, large institutions and the bridge and all of that stuff. So it's a sensitive point. So they did seem to make an effort to have the majority go in sidewalks, but in no way will it ever be all in sidewalks. There are certainly roadbed stations. Now, but I think, another, to me, big section or sort of big thing that's talked about here was what I read a little bit more about, which was curbside management. Obviously, one of the hottest topics we deal with on our, is, I would say those are always the most heated conversations, right? Anytime that something is going to impact parking spots, it's a big problem for a lot of people because, for reasons that we've covered many times. But if you think about it, there's a lot of, what they lay out here is there's a lot of uses that want the curb, parking, loading, bike lanes, a bus lane, outdoor dining, bike parking, bike share docks, food trucks. It could be, we could keep on, like it could be a travel lane, right? There's no saying it can't be actually a traffic lane. So there's all these things. And so they say, arguably, it's some of the most in-demand real estate in New York City. And New York City, and they seem to tread carefully here, like other peer cities, meaning dense, congested cities, are transitioning their approach from a focus on long-term vehicle storage, which is what parking is referred to now, to viewing curb space as a complicated place with competing demands that must be planned and managed in a holistic way. And they say, well, the good news is, again, technology allows us to play with uses in real time in a better way than we used to, like parking meter, used to be, you had to put the quarter in and right? Now you can do things from your phone. So they can manage sort of more nuanced parking regulations and time of day stuff as the technology, allows us to. So obviously they've converted most meters to not be there's no more change meters, or they're very few, I don't know. So this is really all about them saying, we are going to start dealing with the curb, and we are no longer going to give it basically 100% or 90% or whatever it is to long-term vehicle storage. But they do mention in that, like, dealing with placard abuse and stuff like that. Like basically you need spots to turn over, so you need metered spots not to be blocked. And so they contemplate those sort of brass tacks issues here. So that's what that section was about. But one thing, and I don't know where I jotted down the notes on it, that I should have said in the opening is that, but it made me think of it when Jay was talking and Bruce, when you were talking, is that, the goals. So when Jay was saying like it sort of contemplates that long-term plan that had to do with greenhouse gas emissions, the climate related one has all these 2050 goals. And like basically the idea is there's no way you hit climate related goals and sustainability related goals unless you get people out of private cars. So what they do is they say the target is, they don't, basically walking, they sort of presume walking stays the same. So if walking was, let's say 40% or 30% of the things happens pedestrian wise, like that's not going to grow, it's not going to shrink. They just assume that stays the same. But they definitely, the idea is you have to get people to substitute away from private cars, and that might include car share for higher vehicles for sure. But and then it does currently cycling in its various forms, bike shares, cycling on your own bike, whatever, actually still accounts for quite a small percentage. So that percentage, and I think Jay mentioned this, is sort of, you want to get that up to 10%, or you do that one needs to grow sort of by a number of times. And then, there's also new, what I guess they call micro mobility, which Jay touched upon, but that's like, it's not just saying bike stuff, it's like scooters and that stuff. But basically, again, you can't clean up the environment, you can't clean up your air unless you decrease cars. And also the fact that the congestion and the lost time for productive things that people spend in traffic, whether they're sitting on a bus or sitting in their car or sitting in a taxi, has a severe cost. So like, we don't start hitting goals unless we really fundamentally change that. And then these plans are supposed to sort of move us towards that. So I think in that way, then coming back to Bruce's point originally, that when you think about things about, will city bikes start, that kind of thing start taking up, will they be more willing to put it in a roadbed? Then I guess that's why I was saying there's sort of two answers, because on the longer term, I think they're saying, yes, we're no longer going to protect basically 100% of the roadbed. I mean, obviously we have loading zones, but we're no longer going to give it 100% to car parking. So that's that. So did anybody else have, Bruce, what was your topic? I know you were away, so you didn't have a chance to do that, but did you have?
A Vision Zero.
Right. I mean, that one.
Can I just say one thing before that?
Yeah.
It would be wonderful to have some kind of beta test site or prototypes throughout the city to show people what you just described, which is like a myriad of uses of a one block section, with some bikes and cars and pedestrians and charging stations and all this stuff going on, so that people could really relate to it. Because a lot of times when we talk about it, it's just hypothetical, and until you really see a city bike section go into your block, it's like, oh yeah, that's what that looks like. We argued about putting one on the 155th and Broadway, and some of us said, no, do it this way, do it that way. Well, DOT put it in and it's sort of there and nobody's protesting. So I think we have to visualize or put into reality some of these ideas before people will become familiar, and it's always going to take time. It's always going to take time and before it's accepted, and that's all I have to say right now.
I think that's a good point. You know, I don't know. I don't know what the plans are with open restaurant, but the idea that, you know, restaurants, which are private entities, got to just sit in the street. I mean, I loved it during the worst of 2020, but like, I am just wondering where this all goes in the context of this plan and how they're like, is open restaurant really going to be more about dining plazas like we have at Cascaya, or, you know, sidewalk stuff like being less, I mean, remember how hard it was to get sidewalk cafe, you know, stuff approved. Like, will that get easier? Will they pull a lot of that stuff out of the street ultimately? Because that just happened by fiat, you know, ultimately. And I don't think at this point, I don't think that they should get the curb space. I feel like, you know, loading and car parking and charging for electric vehicles and city bikes and bike parking is a big crisis. Like, you can, if you decide to use your bicycle to commute, you actually don't often have a place to put it when you get to your destination. You know, all these things are bigger to me, but that's a very much a personal opinion. But they are doing, I'm sort of curious how the outreach for and sort of comments on this plan relate to the comments and how that'll be integrated with the comments on the open restaurant plan. Wayne?
Actually, just to follow up on that very point, you'll recall that when land use looked at that very issue, the resolution that we passed and that the board passed didn't say we were against the proposed permanent you know, restaurant plan, but we said that they should not move ahead with removing all of these zoning related restrictions before they, you know, draft and get comments on the proposed, you know, new restrictions and design guidelines and everything else that's supposed to go with it, because the use of the sidewalk and the street bed, for that matter, on a temporary basis during an emergency is very different than saying this is forever how it will be used.
Right. But then, you know, one thing I thought about with that resolution was, again, how does it, but that was sort of coming out of planning, which was a little cut off from DOT, but not really.
Well,
And
no,
like,
because what we said is the problem is DOT will now be in charge. We've heard nothing from DOT. There's no coordination. So, I mean, it's very much what you're saying, that you know, city planning should not, you know, on its own remove the zoning, you know, regulations before DOT has drafted, you know, its guidelines and its design parameters and got comments on that. So it needs to be an integrated approach, and heretofore it has not been.
I mean, do people think we should, and Wayne and committee members, I'd sort of be interested in your thoughts, like, as a committee, we have not done any resolution or said anything as a committee or brought anything to the board level on open restaurant and the future of open restaurant. And then, so far the board, it is the land use resolution is how the board has spoken to date. I mean, should we think about at some point in the near future doing something that would go to DOT directly, like, but then starting with our committee? Or is that because so much was contemplated and dealt with in our CB12's resolution that was passed, is there really no need for that?
Well, from my perspective, not being on TNT, but being a board member, I would say the points that you have raised, I think would be, and of course, there's something going by making noise. There's, you know, there is some real points that I think traffic and transportation would want to make in a resolution, because, what land use said was reacting to what Department of City Planning was proposing. And what you're saying is, based upon the competing, interests of this very valuable real estate, there's all the more reason why DOT should, accelerate looking at what are its plans, guidelines, proposals for this permanent, street restaurant, and how does that integrate with other uses for the street and the curb? And, let DOT know that not only from, that CB12 is not only interested from the perspective of zoning and planning, but also interested from the traffic and transportation. How are the sidewalks and streets to be used? What are, what are the game plan? What are the guidelines? What are the regulations? So it's kind of building on what we've already said, but focusing more on your area of expertise.
Yeah, I like that direction. Thank you, Wayne.
Okay. So I'm going to ask, those of us that are here on the committee to sort of ferment on this, and I think we come back to this in the next, realistically, I think it needs to be February or March, because they have been doing, has been public input on open restaurant. And, but then again, figuring out, how to speak on the stuff that's sort of very DOT focused and very committee focused, and sort of that is a good partner resolution to the resolution that CB12 has already passed. And if anybody wants to sort of take the lead on that, I'm definitely open to it, because if we kind of leave it to me, then I'm probably not going to get to it in February. But I mean, yeah, the next meeting would probably be March. So if we let's come back to that topic. But thank you, Wayne, for kind of articulating all of that.
You're welcome.
I just jot a few notes on that. Okay. So just in closing out on this topic, I'm sure it will come as no surprise that I am disappointed, angry, and not necessarily ready to let it all go as it relates to how close our resolution was on what was one of the most uncontroversial safety-driven resolutions that this committee has ever passed. And the idea that the community spoke so clearly in September of 2020 about how outraged people were with the dangerous conditions on Amsterdam. And this board passed a resolution pretty unanimously, or very, very strongly supported, requesting DOT to do something and do it with urgency and do it fast. And DOT comes back with part one of their response with a rock solid plan that was unanimously supported by this committee. And that our unanimous support of something that the entire board had asked for by acting by that resolution in September of 2020 should have almost failed. I don't know what to do with that. I've sort of lost the plot. Then why are we, what are we doing here as a committee? And so I think that one of the gaps is that this document talks about New York City DOT's strategy for our streets. And I think for the most part, I think most would agree, this is thorough, it's well thought out. I'm sure we could pick on some things if we thought about it. I mean, if we'd spent more time, maybe we'd find some things we don't like, but it makes sense. It states what the goals are. It states the context that has been observed and experienced in terms of safety on our streets, in terms of climate crisis, in terms of, you know, our neighborhoods and all those things, and it rolls together this policy. So if you say, okay, we accept this as generally as the policy, then a lot of things follow. But if you say, oh, I reject the idea of that there needs to be bike lanes everywhere, or that we have to start encouraging cycling, or, you know, whatever it might be, any of these things, then, you know, that's a different conversation, right? And I don't, to me, that's not the role of community board, to sort of have a fight with the city agent about the city or the mayor about policy. It's about making sure that the needs and the specifics of CB12 are reflected in policy where it does, where it serves us less, or where there are gaps, or etc. But not upending the whole context that it sits on. So I guess for me, part of this is to make sure, you know, to also, but make sure that we've had an opportunity as a committee to really absorb what is that underlying policy for the city of New York as it relates to its streets. And that hopefully we can do things in a way that we don't find ourselves in this position. I don't know. I feel disrespected as a committee. I'm upset. So this to me was sort of part of what I wanted to do, to at least sort of make sure that we're all checking in on how do we feel about the context that we're working in, and allows us to then take a view for everything that's going to come at us in the future from DOT. I don't know. I know that was a little rambling, but I'm still upset. Bruce, that's an old hand, or is that it's a new hand?
New hand. I'm upset too, because it seemed to me that there were basically two criticisms of the resolution. One was that the sidewalk car washers deserve a break because of their economic challenge versus kid safety, which to me is not even a choice. And the other one is that they didn't believe the DOT statistics, which, do we have to measure every new proposal that comes up against the Vision Zero safety? You know, do we do a checklist of, yes, this project meets 1 through 20 criteria set by the, what is it again? New York City street plan. Do we have to be the guardians of the street plan? I don't know.
No, I mean, if we're gonna,
DOT's job, but we, you know, I challenge myself. Kids spend a lot of time, and Omar Tejada, who is an advocate for this, and I trust him emphatically. And unfortunately, he's no longer on the committee. But I was appalled also at the reaction to our resolution. But we won. So that's the way it goes, you know, it goes that way in Congress.
Yes and no. I don't, you know, this is, again, people can say, obviously, we all come out in different places with most actions, and that's natural. But this to me was something different happened, right? Because it wasn't really about what was proposed.
I don't know I don't know what you're thinking.
It was about something. It just seemed to be about something else. And
I don't know what that is, Debbie. I don't know the people who reacted negatively against it. So you know better than I do.
I mean, well, just there was a stated concern about outreach, really, that was at the pitch, and you know, there was a lot of outreach done, and you know, but then, and that's fair, very fair and appropriate conversation to be had. It's not what this resolution was. Somebody wants to bring us something about DOT does bad outreach or whatever, then we can have a discussion about that. At some
point during your back and forth, you may notice that my hand is up.
Yeah, why don't I stop talking? Why don't you start talking?
Well, both of you. I think this is a very complicated issue, and as Debbie just alluded to, there are other things going on. One thing I see, and it may be, you know, the nature of some young people nowadays of all political stripes, is they tend to be, in general, anti-authoritarian. Now, whether that's a wise way to be or whatever, that's another story. But, you know, we certainly see this tendency on the right, but there's no reason to expect, you know, the absence of this tendency on the left. So, and then the other thing, I mean, historically, in terms of the folks we're talking about, the Dominican Republic, you know, where most of these folks come from, has been one of the most hideous authoritarian monstrosities in the hemisphere. So they're very sensitized to this. So, and again, I'm not saying it's a Dominican thing at all, but that's, so we have to look at this issue and tease it apart and understand it better. And it is annoying. And in fact, I have a former student who is now on another community board, and he sort of sees the same thing in that one can view a committee as a group that's been working on a range of topics and has some sort of you know, expertise. On the other hand, you know, with a different mindset, who the hell are these people? What do they know? They're no, you know, they're just community board members like the rest of us. So I think there are things going on. We have to figure out what's going on. And you know, the other theme I hear from certain of our colleagues, and again, they have every right, you know, to express their views and you know, justification and all, is that behind all of this are the gentrifiers. And all this, you know, and insofar as we agree with the authoritarian DOT and the authoritarian MTA and whatever, you know, we're just identifying with the, and again, this is just a mindset. But and it may not even be accurate, but those are the feelings I get. So I think we must analyze this, and you know, yes, we're disappointed or whatever, but once we understand it better, we may be in a better position to address what were probably very real concerns that caused, you know, this thing almost not to pass. Thank you. I know I was a bit long.
But did sort of bring me to mind of one thing that, I mean, I guess what was shocking to me at base was that this was about, again, one of the most clear and most dramatic, like, safety issues that I've seen on any street, you know, and the numbers in terms of serious injuries and fatalities and whatever, like, this was bad, you know. And but one thing, as you know, that I have been very frustrated with, that was another one of the sub areas, you know, the Vision Zero, is that we never get to hear how it worked. And my understanding is that, you know, these Vision Zero, because this has been policy of New York for a while now, like, they do have these tools that are getting results, and they're constantly developing new approaches and tools in their toolbox on our streets to sort of relate to making things, streets calmer, safer, etc. But we never really, again, they give very high level stuff, but this idea of like, but let's hear, how are things going on 178th Street now that they untangled that knot coming off the bridge, and also at 178th and Broadway, which was a little bit of a treacherous intersection. So how's that doing? And then, so that we can see the full cycle of things that we resolve on and are happy to see, and we've asked to have our streets be safer, like, let's then hear specifically how they worked. And that seems to always be quite hard. They can sort of tell you at the citywide level, sort of in general senses, about decreases in injuries and fatalities and this and that along this corridor or that corridor, but it's like, on these specific things that we had a resolution, I think it would be helpful if we had that from the DOT to help people then see the whole cycle of the result of this work we do. But Bernard Grubman, did you have something that you wanted to say on this topic?
I was actually gonna look up the numbers on Vision Zero for you, but it was apparently a disaster in the last year, you know? And I think, I mean, I don't think that the roads can ever be safe unless people either obey the laws or the laws are enforced. And, you know, I moved up here a few years ago, and especially during the pandemic, I've never seen anything like it. It's like a road race going down Broadway. You know, if a guy's going down Broadway about 80 miles an hour, he's gonna have a hard time stopping for some woman and a kid in a carriage at some point, you know? And also all the motorcycles and powered vehicles on the sidewalks and the bicycles with adults on them, okay. But then you have like literally powered like motor scooters on the sidewalks and things like that. That's all insanely dangerous. And to even think that you'd have to get that all under control before you start considering anything else, because you could put in all the city bike stations and everything else you want to, especially city bike. I mean, people get on city bikes or those Revel scooters and then completely do not obey the law. You know, and if people drive dangerously, dangerous things will happen. You know what I mean? And no matter what it is, whether it's a car or a city bike, which are pretty heavy, you get hit by a city bike, you probably feel it. You know, I got knocked down. I'm a pretty big guy. I got knocked down by a delivery guy who blindsided me when I was living in Astoria. You know, I mean, I wasn't looking in that direction. I had the light with me, and the guy blindsided me, knocked me down, and luckily I was okay. I just skinned my elbow, you know? And, but worse, if I would have hit my head on the sidewalk, you know, something like that. So I think that all this other stuff, and all the other thing I would say, let me know if I'm going on too long. The other thing I would say is that I'm a musician. I have an amp here, weighs 30 pounds. I have a guitar pedal bag, weighs 10 pounds, 20 pounds. I have a guitar that weighs about 10 pounds in the case. I'm not getting on a bicycle and going to a gig. You know, I'm not even going to probably take it in the subway, you know, most likely. I'm going to have to take a cab or have a car. And
Right.
people who live in areas like this up here, they have to commute long distances to other places, and they have to have cars. The subway doesn't do it. Bicycles don't do it. You know, and cabs and Uber are very expensive.
Right.
So
I mean, and that's, I mean, but, and then those kinds of things, I think are what we all think about. And when we're reading and, you know, about differences in neighborhoods, distance from jobs, or, you know, as they say somewhere, like the most primary thing when you move is getting to your job. I mean, obviously we move around in for all sorts of purposes, but getting people to their work and all of that is sort of, we didn't talk about it here, but it sort of underscores a lot of what's here. And point taken also about, you know, enforcement issues. And I do think they seem to talk about, and I will look forward to hearing, like, sort of new ways of dealing with that. When they talk about the pandemic and what changed on the streets, and that also needed to be reacted to in the plan, it was what they called they had some phrase like pandemic of reckless driving. So all these things are very much, I think, sort of also things that are concerns within this. So thank you for adding to the conversation. Gabriella Beal. Let me know if you're able to talk now, I think. Oh, give me a second, Gabriella. Think you should be okay now.
Excellent, thank you. I just have a question. It's actually more of a complaint. PS2, PSMS 278, 219th Street and Broadway. That area, super dark. In front of 5094 Broadway, there's scaffolding, and I think that business is abandoned. It's completely dark. It's one whole block where you can barely see straight ahead of you. I don't think the lighting is working there. There's street lights at 218th Street, and that's right before the bus depot, the MTA bus depot.
Okay.
And there are actually two street lights there. I don't think either of them are working. We've walked there. There's an after-school program. At least 100 children go to that after-school program, and it's after dark. Everybody tries to go home. They usually cross the street to the Columbia University side, which is well lit. But sometimes you just have to make your way quickly, and you walk down that dark street, and you have folks who look very unsavory coming from 9th Avenue, and you also have the lack of lighting right at that street. I'm wondering if there's any way that we can get better lighting or have that scaffolding be gone, because that scaffolding is really troublesome. It just makes things very, very dark. I've bumped into people by that scaffolding. Also, across the street, the MTA bus shelter in front of Twin Donut, that's 5099 Broadway. There doesn't seem to be any lighting in that bus shelter. You have, speaking of the mopeds, the motor scooters, they come out at night, zooming by at least 20 miles per hour on the sidewalk. So if you're not in that bus shelter, you might get whacked, and you're standing there with the kids, with the book bags, with your bags, and you're having to maneuver to get to the bus. And here you have this issue where there isn't enough lighting again. There's a street light across the street at the Sunoco station, but it's not sufficient. Wondering if the bus shelter could have better lighting. And I'm
So these, well, for the street lights,
yes,
because obviously we're not looking to Sunoco to provide our lighting on the street.
yes,
This is and the scaffolding issues, because it is in the purview of our district manager Ebenezer Smith and the district manager team. Chanel, are you able? Can you take those notes and connect with Ebenezer just in terms of district services cabinet meeting? I can maybe take the MTA, because I think that's just an answer of like, either that shelter has a capability or it doesn't, because I imagine a lot of them don't. But about street lights that are out by 5094 Broadway, but also for the Department of Buildings side, that if there's, I know the city has made efforts, and then with the prior borough president, at least, about making sure that scaffolding isn't just staying up, particularly if, nothing's happening anymore. Or do you want me to write something up, or do you have enough information that you can take it, make sure that Ebenezer has it for the next DSC?
I didn't get like all the information, but I'll re-watch the recording and like take it down so I could really like tell Ebenezer for the DSC.
Right. Or hit me up. Just it'll be a little easier if you take the first slot and then come to me if you need something, or watch that part of the video. That'd be great.
Okay.
Ms. Beal, thank you for raising that. The community is obviously the best source of what's not going right. Mary, is that a new hand? I didn't
That's a
mean to
new
ignore-
hand. I just wanted to point out that there are a number of comments and questions in the Q&A that we don't want to ignore.
Okay, thank you, Mary.
Yeah.
Let me just take a note on the MTA shelter. Okay. Okay. Let me just. All right, I think Miss Pineda has left the meeting, and because okay. Gabriella.
Can I just say one thing, Debbie?
Yeah.
The most immediate thing, AP Legrand, I'm not sure what your name is, but is to,
That's Allegra.
okay,
Yeah.
is to contact 311. And I know that's like, oh gee, why am I doing that? But everybody looks at 311 numbers, including, we have a new city council member, Carmen De La Rosa, and down by us. So those numbers matter. And if you're just one person shouting in the wind, you know, they're not going to pay much attention. But if you tell your neighbors and friends and everybody to contact 311, it does help. And above that, to what Debbie is saying, that CB12's district council meeting where they meet with our manager meets with the various representatives from different agencies, DOT, sanitation, Con Ed, you name it, and registers these complaints. So you got to operate on a couple different levels because a lot of it is political. And that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, and I do, in terms of, I mean, people can park up to the crosshatches of a crosswalk, for better or for worse. It's not like a hydrant. Although, I mean, I do think that DOT increasingly does more daylighting, meaning they open up more space where people can't park so that you can see better, because when, to her point, when you park up to the curb, you often then block visibility, making turns and such like that. Somebody is asking about the timeline for the 207th Street elevator repair. And I need to circle back with MTA. I think when it was announced, it was actually announced, if I'm remembering properly, something that was like 4 months. It was between 4 and 6 months. It was not a year like the replacements. So, but let me try to get MTA here to provide some updates, and meet everybody with the new contact person for next month. And because that's true, I mean, that one is that's a big closure, to not have an elevator. And it's sort of, it seemed to sort of get closed with a lot less fanfare than when we had the elevator replacement projects. Jay?
Actually, I was just going to say, in terms of the problem in that area around 219th Street, since the purpose of the district service cabinet is to coordinate the activities of the different city agencies to benefit the neighborhood, I think it's important that the district service cabinet on that question make a list of all the city agencies that might be involved in this, that will be at that meeting, so that they can work together on resolving this problem.
Well, but who did you have in? I mean, I'm not sure if buildings is always there and they've got the scaffolding, but in terms of lights, that's just DOT, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, who did you have anybody else in mind?
No, I meant.
Or are you just saying to make sure that buildings is there because
Yeah,
coordinate with,
coordinate with DOT.
Yep. Yeah. No, that's exactly right. It's one time that everybody's sitting around the table together. so that hopefully these things can resolve more easily. All right. Anything else? And next month we are meant to have the big presentation, update on the busway. So as far as I know, we're still scheduled for that. And as I said, I will try to have the MTA stop by as well. Oh, Allegra. Before we adjourn?
Hi.
Hi.
I was hoping, hi Debbie, thanks. I was hoping to get a discussion of the Broadway Bridge on, maybe not when we discuss that other big huge thing, but perhaps March then. It looks like Eve Kessler had a Streets blog
Yes,
post about
I
it, and it
know.
looks like 6 years really that they're going to be blocking the sidewalk. It's just a really long time, and you know the street there, I don't know if she made a point about it, is it's got those great things which are tire pinchers. So cyclists, even if they're trying to do a responsible thing, you can't really ride in the street safely as a cyclist. You'll face plant.
Oh, no, and those pictures, well, first of all, well done you, because it was, you know, I think a lot of the substance of that was because of issues that you've highlighted, and gotten sort of conversations around. My family is cracking up about my quote. But and I do think they're talking about the length of the project, which some of that, it's a long project, we know that, but part of that, okay, we've done a little bit of that, but it doesn't mean that every phase of the project has the same sidewalk impact.
Yeah.
However, to the extent that the construction employees' vehicles are sort of like, that part doesn't go away. But anyway, but it is actually, it's a good point though, because when we last talked about this, you know, and I said like, you know, it would be nice to hear from the Broadway
Yes.
Bridge team.
Exactly. And
and I
speaking,
don't
they
have-
employ the vehicles, you know, part of the issue is that they close down the sidewalks and then they shut down a lane of traffic for parking the construction workers' vehicles, which just
Right.
seems particularly disrespectful of the community. And, you know, right around the corner where they're doing the Marble Hill Metro North Station on 225th Street, there they have the sidewalk closed down and they have like half the street blocked off so that you can safely go that 100-yard stretch on 225th. Meanwhile, Broadway, which is significantly more trafficked and dangerous, you're on your own.
Yeah. All right. So let me, at some point this month, I'll talk to DOT. Obviously, it's a little quiet over the holidays and through the balance of December. So about what it would take to kind of get them in, because realistically, if we really have something like 5 more years to go, then we are going to need, you know, is that once a year an update or every 2 years? You know, we need to have the check-ins. And then to your point, I think, which is a good one, is like, let's go through this again. You know, like how long for each?
Yeah.
Because what I remember in the very originally, it was sort of like, oh, it's this sidewalk and it'll look like this, and we'll do that, and then we'll shift to the other one, and then that opens.
Yeah.
And it sounds like that's really not the way it's going down. Okay, but thank you for the tickler on that,
That
and
would be
thank you
great,
for
'cause I
getting
would
the
like to,
visibility.
if possible, to have a resolution that the Broadway Bridge, that's really the only footpath connection between the neighborhoods. There should be a sidewalk on both sides of the street. I mean, really, if it's a possibility to do a resolution, and then I will go and hang out in some Bronx CB meeting and see if they'll do a resolution as well, perhaps together. All right, thanks.
Thanks a lot. All right. With that, do we have a motion to adjourn?
I move we adjourn, and so does Bruce. So one of us will be the second.
I second it.
All
Happy
right.
New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year. Thanks everybody for your participation tonight. Bye-bye.
Happy and healthy.
Indeed, indeed.